Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. It's week 7. One of the most important weeks of the college football season is here. I call it moving day. Abe doesn't like that because he thinks that golf is they have a domination over the term moving day. No, it is moving day in college football across the country. Because the Big Ten has some compelling matchups. You got Ohio State, you got Oregon, then you got Penn State, and you got USC, and then you go down to the SEC, and you got Ole Miss and LSU. You've got Texas and Oklahoma because that's an SEC matchup, and that makes no sense. But it's okay. We're moving on. Cal and Pittsburgh in the ACC. You got Iowa State, West Virginia in the Big 12, Kansas State and Colorado. There's a ton of great action here on the college football slate, and we're breaking it all down right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for jumping in with us. We're going to get right into these games, but before I do that, got to do what I always do. Abe Gordon, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. And yeah, don't call it moving day. Like, that's very clearly a golf term. We know which day it is. It's very specific. I guess if I want to stretch it to you, then like it's Saturday in golf, it's Saturday in college football, but that's not what you meant, and you got lucky with that, and so that's its own thing. But
Saturdays
look, quite frankly,
day in golf. It's moving day this season.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. You can move anything. Nothing.
The concept is the same.
But look, at the end of the day, whatever you want to call it, this is one of the very few weekends, and I know we've had a couple that have been the inverse, right? Where you're like, oh man, there's not that many great games to look forward to. This is one where it's kind of the other way, where you've got the obvious primetime big deal games that are going to be important when all is said and done. This is one of the weeks that has a couple of those.
Yeah, and obviously there's no bigger one than the first one on our slate. It's Ohio State, and it is Oregon. It is the biggest game of the season to this point, at least in the Big Ten. The SEC, of course, you can make the claim that it's Alabama and Georgia, and that one certainly delivered on the hype. And I know the rest of the country is certainly hoping that this one delivers on the hype as well. If it's even half as good as that Georgia or Alabama game, then we're in for a treat. But really, it's the first big test for either one of these teams. Oregon has not really seen a whole host of really competent, high-level contenders. Ohio State in that same sort of category. They've played some conference games and neither really had any trouble with those. The only common opponent is Michigan State there. But the first thing that I really want to address here, Abe, is the quarterback position. It's the thing that everybody's going to be highlighting, and I think that it's just the most compelling topic for this game so far. Will Howard and Dillon Gabriel. Will Howard, of course, he comes in from Kansas State. He's a transfer quarterback. Is he a guy that can win Ohio State a national championship? Is he a better player than the guy they threw out from last season? I think this is really your first opportunity to get a good look at that. Dillon Gabriel, on the other hand, he really needs to prove it in this one. It's critical for him to come out and have a really good effort because his team is not as talented as Will Howard's team. And it doesn't matter how you feel about either one of these teams. That's just sort of the fact of the matter. Oregon is not as talented as Ohio State. That's not really a big hot take. But do we start to see Ohio State get stressed at all in this game at all? Is Oregon able to put them into those sort of situations? Specifically, how does Will Howard respond to those situations? Kansas State was a good football team last year with Will Howard under center. They just were. They were a team on the precipice of a potential college football playoff berth. They made the Big 12 championship game, but Ohio State hasn't been forced to do anything yet. They could run the ball if they want to. They could throw the ball if they want to. They're going to stay ahead of the chains and do whatever the hell they want. It's part of the benefit of playing a cupcake schedule like they have, and on the other end, being far more talented than any team that they play for most of the season. But if Oregon is able to put them into those situations, how does Will Howard respond? Do we see some designed quarterback runs here in this game? Do we see Will Howard actually throw the ball down the field when there's a pass rush looming in his face? We haven't seen that yet this season. That doesn't mean they're not capable of those things. It's just that we haven't seen it. We don't know. And the same kind of goes for Dillon Gabriel. It's just that Dillon Gabriel kind of has a little bit more notches on his belt, if you will. But both of these guys really, really need big performances on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll talk about Dillon Gabriel and Oregon in just a moment. I want to focus here on Ohio State for the start of this, though. And I think the first question, and I'm going to kind of correlate what I ask of these two teams to other teams we've talked about this year. We asked about Georgia heading into the Alabama game. Is there a part of this offense that they have not put out on the field yet? Have they saved something for that big game? And I think I have a very similar question to Ohio State. Like you mentioned it, they haven't been tested. It's been a relatively easy schedule. They have not had to fully open up that offense if they didn't want to. And so I do wonder if there's a couple of wrinkles that we'll see. One of those being, as you mentioned, Will Howard being used as a quarterback runner a lot more than he has. He hasn't had to, and I think it's smart not to, right? You don't want to put him in trouble. You don't want him to take hits. You don't want the season to be too big a wear and tear. But if this game is going to be that sort of game, this is the sort of game that I feel he excels best in, because I think there are gritty performances from him that maybe aren't the most impressive statistically, but that use his legs. And I think we saw that at Kansas State. He can win big games by converting third downs, converting fourth downs, escaping pressure, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how often you even need to do that, considering the two running backs that you have when you're the Buckeyes. And it's like, but hey, you look at it, an extra blocker, it read options, it forces players to make decisions. They can go for big plays. So there is that aspect of it. I'm interested to see everything from the Ohio State perspective, because we haven't seen it, as you mentioned. It feels like it should be easy. Like, as much as we're going to talk about Jeremiah Smith, and rightfully so, like Emeka Egbuka is like a borderline first round draft pick at a receiver in his own right. And you have obviously got the two running backs, as we mentioned. Pretty good offensive line, solid defense. They've got everything. Now it's time to go on the road, mind you. It's not an easy one, to go prove it, though. And I think we'll learn a lot about them. Now you flip to the other side, and I got a couple of questions about Oregon, and it's going to start with Dan Lanning. We're going to talk about it when we get to the Penn State setup. I think you start to ask questions about whether Dan Lanning can win the big one, because he had two opportunities against Washington last year, dropped both of them. One of them, I would say, largely because of decisions that he made as a head coach. That, of course, being the regular in-season game, not the Big Ten title. Big 12, Pac-12 title game, which would now theoretically be a Big Ten. You know what I mean? The second game.
It's so silly.
Yeah. So I do think you start there. I'm not ready to thrust the James Franklin, can he ever get over the hurdle nonsense on him yet. But I do think you start to ask that question if they fall short in this one. And that may not be because of him coaching. It might just be the players and the team. The other thing is, for Oregon's offense, which Oregon offense are we going to get in this game? And not just offense, like team overall, but you remember it was a tight game, a one-possession game at the end of the year, at the start of the year against Idaho. They scored 24 points. They got it going against Boise State a little bit, but again, that was a 3-point win. Now, after that, they started to find some separation, right? They blew out Oregon State. They blew out UCLA. They blew out Michigan State. And that Michigan State game a week ago, honestly, probably should have been a even bigger margin. Too many turnovers from Dylan Gabriel, and he's got 3 interceptions on the year. I feel like we didn't get the third interception from Bo Nix until like the final game of the season last year. And so there is a level of offensive efficiency they haven't even hit yet. Can they hit it at home in this game? It's obviously they're going to be having to. I'm asking that of them against a tougher defense. And so that's the question. Now we go to where we are with Dylan Gabriel, right? And you talked about it. You called it a notch on the belt. The biggest one for me was last year's win against the Texas Longhorns. Oklahoma was not a better team in that game. Now, the Oklahoma defense stepped up in a big way, but you go back and watch the second half of that game and what Dylan Gabriel did. And we've talked about it before, specifically with his legs. This was a guy that put the team on his shoulders against a better program, quite frankly. They were not better than Texas, but he was the better player, the best player on the field that day. If Oregon is going to win this game, Garrett, Dylan Gabriel, we need to leave this saying he was the best player on the field that day, or certainly, at least without question, he was the best quarterback on the field that day, and you can leave whatever conversation you want. I'm also interested in this secondary for Ohio State. We know about the transfer of Caleb Downs coming in, and we haven't really heard or talked much about them. Why? Because we haven't had them challenge down the field very often.
Yeah.
I am excited to see if Oregon can do that and kind of how they handle that. This is a game where Oregon needs to come out and punch them in the mouth quickly. It's not a game that Oregon wants to settle into. It's also, in my opinion, a game that Oregon needs to find an up and down the field sort of situation. I think they'd be much comfortable trading blows offensively with Ohio State than trading blows defensively with Ohio State. I think this one has got to get into the high 20s, low 30s for Oregon to have a chance.
Wow. I don't know.
Yeah, you very, very strongly disagree with that, and that's totally fine.
Because I think both teams could win in any type of style.
I don't know if Oregon can win.
It's not that
like
simple.
17-10.
The margins are too thin. This game is not that simple. This isn't a game of one team can do this so much better than the other one that all you got to do is get to 30 points and then that's going to be it. I mean, not saying that's exactly what you said, but look, this game is a lot more than get to a certain number. I think Oregon can win a low scoring game. I think it tends to favor Ohio State, sure, but this is also Oregon can. They've got a pretty solid defense in their own right.
The question, I said what I said because let me ask you this, because like I said what I said because I think it can be answered in this manner, because I don't want to misconstrue what I said either, I guess. But like, if I trust one team, one of these two teams, to be able to shut down the other one defensively, I trust Ohio State's defense to shut down Oregon way more than I trust Oregon's defense to shut down. That's why I feel they've got to get into some sort of scoring. That's the concern for me.
Sure, I see what you're saying there. That makes a little bit more sense. Okay, fine. But this also does, to that point, this feels like a Jim Knowles type of game. Like, this feels like we're all talking about the quarterbacks, or me specifically, and the offenses, but the Ohio State defenses, they've been able to go man to man with every team that they play this year, and pretty much that's enough for them across the board. And it might be enough. I don't think it's going to be enough for them here, but I fully expect Jim Knowles, who gets very creative in his stunts, he pushes the envelope too. With the types of coverages that he's able to do, and the blitzes and the disguises and everything he does, that's where having a guy like Dillon Gabriel does help. Having an experienced guy under center, it's going to be effective for Oregon. If this was a younger quarterback, then I'd have a couple more problems, I guess, with the Oregon offense. But this team, I mean, you like it. You pull this back to the damn Idaho game. That's a different season. Like, that's forever ago. That's so much different. This team has gotten so much better week over week over week. Now, on that point, Dillon Gabriel did put the ball in harm's way a couple of times last week. Yeah. And this Jim Knowles defense is going to move a little bit faster. It's a little bit more free on that back end. And they don't have a guy named Caleb Downs on that defense. That guy is going to be a game wrecker, potentially, if Dillon Gabriel puts the ball in harm's way in the same way that he did against Michigan State. Now, I also think that the game plan is going to be radically different than what you saw against Michigan State. It's a game where you can effectively just lean on your opposition and figure it out. I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to do that in this game in the same way. I think the defensive line for Oregon is still solid enough to find its own way. It can get after the passer pretty effectively. But if Will Howard's able to extend these plays and he can do things with his legs and keep them ahead of the chains, I feel like I say that very often, but it's the most important thing in college football is staying ahead of the chains, period. Getting away from third and long situations. If Ohio State can avoid that, which I think they've done an extremely good job of to this point in the season, you do that by running the ball, you do that by avoiding sacks and staying and having a guy like Will Howard who's able to maneuver and get up and fall ahead. Don't fall back, fall ahead. Dominate the line of scrimmage. I don't know if Ohio State's going to be able to dominate the line of scrimmage in the same way that they did against Iowa. I was a little surprised the amount of success that Ohio State was able to have running the ball. But you saw that commitment to getting back to the rushing attack in that third quarter, and they scored 4 touchdowns on 4 tries. Trayvon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, these guys are beasts. They can do whatever they want to. I could see this game going in any number of ways. And look, that success and their ability to manufacture drives and keep them all put together is reflected in that red zone efficiency. They score touchdowns on 21 of 22 of their red zone appearances. That means that if you get into the red zone, they're scoring a touchdown. That's very valuable. Very, very valuable, especially in a game like this where the margins are this thin. They are razor tight in this kind of game. And I just wonder how the Oregon defensive line is going to stack up in this game. They can affect the passer, but the Bucks don't allow a lot of sacks. I think if Oregon can get them into a spot where they are behind the chains and have to drop back, and Will Howard is not going to be able to pick it up with his legs, then I think Oregon really has a good chance of creating some problems here for the Ohio State offense. There's disruption potential, and I think if the Ducks are able to keep Ohio State, if you're able to mitigate, you're not going to shut it down completely because that rushing attack is just too good, and Chip Kelly is that good of an offensive play caller, especially at that rushing attack. If you're able to do a lot of those little things well and keep Ohio State behind the chains, they're going to give themselves an opportunity to win. But I just think this game is going to be won on the offensive side of the ball. If you're Oregon, you have to mitigate that Ohio State offense as much as you can, but then possess the ball when you have the ball. I just have a hard time believing it's going to happen, but it makes for a really compelling matchup. It's number 2 and number 3. Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite in this game on the road for a reason. They are the more talented team. They should win this game, but Oregon's going to give them every bit of a challenge to do that.
Yeah, the one thing I'm interested in is who can start fast in this game, too. Well, Oregon has 3, ever since that Boise State game in which they started slow. We know they started slow against Idaho, and you said that was like a season ago, and I absolutely agree with you. They've had 3 straight games where they've scored in the 20s or higher in the first half. Ohio State is coming off of a game against Iowa where it was 7-3 at halftime. I don't think Ohio State wants to be playing a game where they've scored 1 touchdown in the first half, not on Saturday and not on the road. And so I think whoever can get off to a fast start, and this goes on both sides of the ball, by the way, fast start defensively and fast start offensively. I think you can swing momentum and kind of carry it there. You mentioned the Oregon D-line. Jordan Birch is the guy to watch for along those lines. He had an outstanding game last week, named Big Ten Defensive Player, the whatever award they give, I don't know. But to me, you can slow Birch and that whole Oregon line down by running the ball. That's going to prevent them from coming after Will Howard in the manner that you just spoke about. And you talked about it. If they can force Ohio State behind the chains and 3rd down and long and passing situations. But on the flip side, if Ohio State can stay balanced, if they can run the ball with success, it will prevent Oregon's pass rushers from being uber aggressive. They're going to have to hold lanes and stay and make sure it is, in fact, a pass play versus a run play, just that extra tick. But you also mentioned it. These 2 teams, very good pass defense, very good run defense. That secondary for Ohio State against the nation's most efficient passer right now in Dylan Gabriel could be – there's just so many key matchups. You can't limit it to just one. But, look, we've had this one circled, Garrett, for the start of the season. Like, we knew who Ohio State's first 4, 5, 6 games were, whatever the number they are, 5 games, I think. They're 5-0, whatever. Mm-hmm. We knew who they were. And we said, all right, let's scrap all these. Like, it's a waste of time. And to an extent, it was. We'll find out on Saturday. What is that, the 12th? I don't know my days. We'll find out on the 12th when they go to Autzen Stadium just what that Buckeye team is about. And the same thing goes for Oregon. We've known this game is going to mean almost as much as it could possibly mean in the Big Ten. And now that we're here and now that it does, it's time to get going, man.
Yeah, and look, you mentioned the Oregon defense needs to stop that rushing attack. The last time they faced a really potent rushing attack with a guy named Ashton Genty leading the way.
Oh, don't. I thought that was a season ago. What happened?
Oh, buddy.
Just talking about that.
No. It's one of those things. The teams are entitled to get better. They have the right to get better.
I agree.
But this Ohio State team hasn't been tested this year. They're the road team. I just need to see them. I need to see them respond to getting punched in the face a bit. They did in a way against Iowa, albeit a much inferior in Iowa team that is just decrepit on the offense. A team that literally Caleb Johnson is in the transfer portal. So he's redshirting and leaving the program. because of how bad that offense really was, and they're going nowhere fast. But on the other hand, it's like last thing I'll say about this is this is a show me game, like prove it for Oregon, not for Ohio State, for Oregon. Oregon is the newcomer. Oregon's the team who's trying to prove that they belong. Oregon is the home team, and they're trying to defend home field advantage. Oregon is not the team that has won these types of games. Show me. Prove it. Dan Lanning hasn't proved it. He's won plenty of games. He's done a really good job, and he's been one of the most successful young coaches in all of college football. But generally speaking, when the show gets biggest, when the lights are on, he hasn't responded yet. That doesn't mean he's not going to, but I just know that there's going to be some question marks from people, and then people are going to be like, all right, well, when is it actually going to happen? Now, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but I just have a hard time believing Ohio State's going to lose this game. I just have a really hard time believing Ohio State loses this game. I wouldn't be overly shocked and surprised, but Ohio State should win. That's my expectation, and that's what I expect to see.
Before we wrap up the conversation on this game, let me push you on that you
Sure.
have a tough time seeing Ohio State lose that game. What happens if in game? I'm not talking about down the road and projecting future playoff nonsense. In this game, what would have had to have happened for Oregon to win? Is it turnovers? Is it high scoring? Is it like what's if you could circle one or two things that are kind of preventing you from seeing Ohio State lose, what would that be, if that makes sense?
So the reason I see Ohio State,
I know there's not an easy answer or like one.
The two things that travel in college football better than anything are rushing attacks and defenses. And that's something that Jim Knowles and this rushing attack and with Chip Kelly at the Stead, they do exceptionally well, if not better than just about anybody in the country. Like you can make an argument that they have the best defense in America. And you could also make the argument that they have the best rushing attack in America. They're playing on the road, and that's the best way to mitigate that sort of advantage. That travels. It travels. And I think that's really going to be the difference in this game is the fact that they can do it a little bit better than Oregon can. I don't expect them. I'm not saying they cover the spread or any of that crap. I'm not getting into betting lines or anything like that with this projection. This is a straight money line type of topic.
By the way, you mentioned this is a Jim Knowles game. I think it also has to be a Chip Kelly game. We remember Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator as one of those creative minds where guys were just running open all the time, creative run plays as well. I think we need to see that metamorphosis in this game as well. Thank you.
Good word. I like that word. And another thing I like is another Big Ten matchup. Look, huge litmus test for both of these teams. James Franklin, we know what the barometer is for him. It's beating Michigan and Ohio State. You're 25-0 against everybody except for Michigan and Ohio State. You're 0-4 against those two teams. That's over the last 3 years. Lincoln Riley, this is a guy who's starting to feel some heat right now. And they lost to Minnesota. They lost to Michigan. They lost to the two big M's in the conference. And now they just don't want to lose to the big PS. Does Penn State belong in this title conversation? Do they? They're third in the betting odds behind the two guys who we just talked about moments ago. They're clearly on the outside looking in when it comes to Vegas, right? But not quite so bad as a Michigan or anybody else down that line. They are very clearly in that third spot. They're trying to prove that they belong in that second spot. And that happens by winning games like this. Lincoln Riley is also proving that USC is one of the better teams that's coming into this conference. They have 2 tough losses, but a win here could flip the script of their entire season. It really could. And you lose, you have opportunities to play the big dogs in the Big Ten. And if you can get a win against one of those big dogs, I could check off a box for Lincoln Riley in his first season in the Big Ten. But ultimately, the losing coach is going to get buried in this game more than anything else. They need wins as badly as they need water, both of these programs, just for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, man, if you're Lincoln Riley and you're at home in this one and you're going to be what? Let's just say real quick, just forget the minute how we feel about this game. If you lose this game, you're 3-3 on your first season in the Big Ten. And you've still got games, with Notre Dame later down the road. You got at Washington, Nebraska. I mean, there's an opportunity that you're looking at like potentially 500. And so it is a big one for SC. There's no doubt about it. But I'm with you. I think this is something where I am going to learn much more about either what is or what isn't Penn State. We talked about having to go on the road. I think that proves a little bit of something, not just winning big games at home, but more importantly, and look, I know SC had that loss to Minnesota, and it cost them the number next to their name, and they're no longer ranked. But this is just because it's a ranked top 5 versus an unranked team. I think it's a very difficult game still for Penn State. I still think USC is a very talented team that has not been anywhere close to putting it together. And whether that's on the head coach, whether that's on the coordinators, who they brought in a couple of new guys to try and get it done, it just hasn't meshed for them right now. I think the thing for Penn State is, can they actually lean on their run game? I think that's the one thing I've been a little hesitant in seeing from them. And it's not that you don't want to put the game on the hands of Drew Aller, right? We were told last year he was the guy, and this is the next evolution in the quarterbacking of Penn State and blah, blah, blah. And then it fell flat, right? It fell very flat. But that's okay. He was a freshman. He was a first-time starter, and he's learned some lessons. I still don't think you want to put it in his hands. The same way that Tennessee didn't want to put it in the hands of Nico. I don't think Penn State wants it to be entirely in the hands of Drew Aller. I think this is a game where Allen and Singleton need to step up, and they need to run rampant. And if there's one thing I think the SC defense can do a little bit, now we know how troubled the SC defense has been in recent years, and they're better, they're improved. But there's still obviously glaring holes on the defense. The one thing they have been able to do a little bit is handle the run game. And so we'll see. We'll see how that matches up, because you talked about it. What travels, defense and run game. I think it as much as it was a comment for you on Ohio State, that would be my comment here with Penn State. Yeah, I think it's a very similar game. I think it's nice to see them get a little bit uneasy, at least at the start of this one, and we'll see how it plays out. The only thing that would surprise me here would be like USC winning big. I don't think I'd be massively surprised if Penn State ran away from this one. They like some of the other teams we've talked about, have started slow in games. Maybe they've saved up some of their offensive playbook for a big moment, for a big game. I'm interested to see if they can unleash the full potency of the Nittany Lion offense.
Yeah, and there are pieces of this game that really, really bend in the favor of Penn State. I mean, you talk about the fact that Miller Moss, he started off the season really well, but he's been a mixed bag since then. Not a bad quarterback. He hasn't been actively detrimental in their opportunities, giving them opportunities to win. It's just that, his completion percentage is down, his yardage per game is down, everything's down, but it's also the schedule ramped up, and that's just the reality of the situation, right? I mean, when you play a team like Michigan, generally speaking, your numbers are going to go down because, you face good defenses. Penn State also has a pretty damn good defense. And do you know one thing that Miller Moss has had this year? He's had a guy in his face pretty much constantly. They're 111th in pressure rate allowed. That's not awesome. This is a Penn State pass rush that's about as good as anybody in the country. If not, I think they're the number one pressure rate team in America. And the other thing about USC, the way that you would mitigate some of that is you run the ball. They're okay. They're okay with the rushing attack. It's not fantastic, but it's like somewhere in like the 60s or 70s or something like that. It's not going to be something that's going to be good enough to win you this football game, especially against a Penn State defense that, hold on, I have my notes. Let's see. 8th in points per game. They allow 11.4. They're 4th in total yards per game. It's 233 yards per game. They're 11th in passing yards per game at 157. 4th in rushing yards allowed per game at 76. And they don't allow explosive plays. They don't get after, and then they get after that ass in that pass rush. This is the best passing attack that they've seen by far, in fairness to USC. But if your defense is going to take away opportunities, and then you have an offense that's going to run the air out of the ball, USC has to take advantage of every small opportunity that they have in this game. I don't know how many they're going to have. I just don't, because Penn State, you mentioned it, they might start slow. Sure, on paper they start slow because they're turning around and they're putting that football in the chest of Nick Singleton or Katrin Allen. That's what they're going to do in the first half. They're going to lean on you. And this USC defense is going to get worn down, and they're going to get introduced to Big Ten football, and they're going to get punched in the mouth. It's going to be close at halftime, and Penn State is going to run it up in the second half. That's just the reality. Unless USC can get a lead early. That is the way that you put it in Drew Allar's hands and force him to win this football game. Otherwise, I don't see a chance.
Yeah, what I am interested from the Penn State side of things is and they'll take the touchdowns however they come, right? But like,
of course, yeah,
there's this combination of like, we want to break you, right? Break your defense and pound you into submission. But there's also this quality of like, there's big plays to be had against SC. And so it's interesting. I'm going to be interested to see if they pick and choose their spots, if they're looking for big plays, if they take some chances, or if they're comfortable just riding out what is a consistent offense. Because I think Penn State, the one thing we have seen, especially in their pass game this year, has been more explosion than we've had in recent years.
Yeah, really. And one final note that I'm going to make on this game. This also goes to the first game that we talked about. If you missed it, just hit the rewind function and just go check it out. But teams traveling 2+ time zones are 1-7 in conference play this year. Ohio State is also going on the road and playing in a tough game here on the road. You're 2 time zones to the west. You're losing multiple hours. And was it 3 hours at that point? Or some cases, what is it? 2, 3, 4 hours? I don't even know what it is off the top of my head. But look, it's going to be a weird situation for one of these teams. I don't know which one's going to be yet, but we'll see if that actually ends up having any impact on the game. Most of those instances were the likes of Stanford and Cal and other teams coming east. The only win, I think, is Miami, who went west to go play Cal. But we'll see if that actually has any impact on the game. I doubt it is going to be the reason that anybody loses necessarily. But one game that is unbelievable that it took us this long to get to it, because generally speaking, this is the number one game on the list during this week. It's just, that's how it is. The Red River Shootout. It's one of the biggest games of the season. Depending on who you ask, it's the biggest game of the year. And some say it's the best rivalry in all of sports, not even just college sports. I'm not going to have that discussion right now. That's a discussion that we can have in March when we don't have as much college football to discuss. What we do have to discuss is the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners, one of the best rivalries in all of college football. And one of the reasons it's such a great rivalry, Abe, is because it's a tight contest. Very rarely do you see a team run away with this one. 9 of the last 11 have been decided by 1 score or less. Ironically, everybody points to Texas being the better team over the last couple of years. The Sooners have won 4 of the last 5, including last year in a pretty crazy game where Quinn Ewers was turned over a couple times in that game and had the crazy second half, but it wasn't enough. Dylan Gabriel, it was his big coming out party. And Brent Venables got the first big win of his tenure over there at Oklahoma. This is just a weird game that always finds a way to be weird. And I fully expect some of that to happen here in this one. It's a 2-score spread, 14.5 points. And this is also the first leg of a wild 2-game stretch for the Texas Longhorns, who are coming off of the bye. You got the Dogs coming into Austin, Texas this time next week. I wonder if there's a chance that the players are going to be looking past it. I doubt it. If this was any team other than Oklahoma, there might have been a chance for that. But for a lot of people, this is the game that matters more than anything. Beat Oklahoma and then figure out the rest later.
I'm having a tough time discussing this game, Garrett, and I want to turn it around because I need to ask you just straight up, like what's the path to victory for OU in this game? Like, I know we can blabber about what could happen and what we, but like, I don't want to like pretend to our viewers or our listeners, depending on if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're on a podcast app, whatever. Like, I don't know. What's your best hope? Like, Quinn Ewers comes back and is incredibly rusty. Obviously turnovers can be the great equalizer. But I just don't buy that the Oklahoma defense, even though they're better than some units, is going to be enough to make up for the lack of offense. Deion Burks, Oklahoma's #1 receiver, is expected to miss this game. I have a tough time making any arguments for how the Sooners actually win this thing. And I think it's okay to admit that. Like, it's supposed to be a good game. I just don't think it will be.
I understand what you're saying, and look, turnovers are the great equalizer, but there's also week to week regression in college football that doesn't exist in any other sport. This is a sport that doesn't always make sense. Why does Vanderbilt beat Alabama?
Well, and I
I don't
think you
know.
talked about the look ahead factor and like
There are
ignoring.
things.
I
You have
think
a
that actually
starting
helps
quarterback.
Texas.
Your
Yeah.
starting quarterback is also coming back from an oblique injury. Okay, well, what happens if he comes in and throws a pick on his first play? Okay, well, then now you have this lingering doubt. You have this confusion potentially with the offense. Well, should we go back to Arch Manning? Should we go do what X, Y, and Z? What blah 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 blah? Maybe he comes back and he just turns around and he tries to do the rushing attack, and maybe we just hand the ball off. Maybe we just do whatever. Maybe it doesn't work. Because the one thing that Oklahoma does do really well is they do stop the run. So you're not going to be able to turn around and hand the ball off and find any level of success against this Oklahoma team. Your hope in this game, turnovers, first and foremost. You need some turnovers. You're third in FBS in takeaways. So we've seen them have success there because they're able to get pressure on the quarterback. They can do all those things, and they're opportunistic when that situation calls for it. But Michael Hawkins has to play a really good game, a clean football game. He has to be using his legs effectively and scrambling and get outside of the pocket. But really, it comes down to Texas making mistakes. Texas has to make these kinds of mistakes. And if Quinn Ewers, oblique injuries, Braves fans out there, you saw how it affected Sean Murphy. He was gone for 2 months. 2 months. And if you have quarterback, Derek Carr in the NFL, he's gone. He's on the shelf on the IR. He's gone for a while. Quinn Ewers is coming back pretty quickly off this oblique injury. He's supposed to be good to go in this game. There's also a freshman behind him. So if Quinn Ewers he gets the start, he doesn't play really well early. The oblique is bothering him just a little bit. Then you insert a freshman quarterback who's never made a start in this rivalry game before. We saw what Quinn Ewers did in this game last year. You have the opportunity to screw this game up pretty quickly. Oklahoma's a good enough football team. They have their deficiencies, and there's several of them, especially on defense. That doesn't mean that they're just going to roll over and die. And I just don't expect that to be the case. I think that Texas is more likely to run it up and potentially win this game big. I think there's an avenue for that. But to say that there's no path forward for Oklahoma in this type of rivalry game, I think it's foolhardy. Oklahoma's got a shot. They'll have a shot in this game, but they just need a couple of things to bounce their way. It's not something that I would ever bet on either. Absolutely not.
Right. Yeah. I think the question for Oklahoma is who steps up to make some big plays on offense. Like that they're going to have to find that. They were able to grind it out last year because of Dylan Gabriel's excellence. And I don't think they're going to have that this year at the quarterback position. And so they're going to need someone to make some plays, whether it's on offense or on defense. And if that doesn't happen, I just don't see them winning this game.
Yeah, Deion Burks is the person who I would point to, but he's likely out in this game. There are just, to your point,
a lot
there
of
are
things
a lot
stacked
of different
against them.
things
Yeah.
stacked up against them in this game. And I mean, ultimately, you're just hoping that Texas makes some mistakes. But I also think Texas has a pretty big chip on their shoulder from last season, and they're going to come in here ready to kick some ass. And I really have a hard time believing that Oklahoma does win this game.
Yeah, same.
The 14.5-point spread is big, and numbers like that freak me out a little bit. Admittedly, especially in college football and ranked matchups, especially rivalry matchups. But yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. Michael Hawkins just needs to find some explosive plays. He did it against Auburn, another stout defense, but I mean, he's probably going to have to go toe to toe with this Texas offense, and I have a hard time seeing him do that.
Let me ask you this: is this a better test for Texas than that Michigan game was?
Hell no. No,
Okay.
no.
Well, then
I mean, this is a more emotionally, more emotional.
They're going to get blown out then.
Why? I mean, Texas blew up in the first quarter in that game, and everything went out the window. I think the Oklahoma offense is better than that Michigan offense. It's less one-dimensional.
Is it? With Burks out, is it?
Yeah.
I guess.
It's a little bit less one-dimensional. It's also Michigan's a type of team that if they get into any kind of deficit, it's over. I think Oklahoma would be a little bit better at that. I mean, I think Michigan's also it was also a true road game. against the defending national champions,
Yeah.
and there are other factors involved, and I don't want to do a like-to-like comparison necessarily there. And I just think Michigan's a better football team.
No,
But
and that's fine. I'm just suggesting that that's not good for the Sooners if that's the case.
it's potentially not good. You're definitely
Yeah.
right about that, and I think there are a lot of different things that kind of work against Texas. But look, it's the Cotton Bowl, it's the county fair, and lots of things can happen over there in Texas. The Red River Shootout and crazy stuff has happened, and I wouldn't be shocked if it does again. But another place where crazy things might be happening, Death Valley. It might be the most unpredictable game on the slate this weekend. And I just look at two things in particular. And I'm just going to look at it's just the scenarios that surround both of these teams. You have Ole Miss. They're playing their third straight SEC game. It's their seventh game in a row without a bye week. And they were on the road last week. And this is the second leg of a back-to-back road trip against two of the most hostile road environments in the SEC. Now, it helped them last week because they jumped out big and were able to just sort of suffocate South Carolina. They'll have a little bit more of a hard time doing it in this one. And meanwhile, LSU, they're the lower ranked team. They're the home team, but they haven't traveled in 4 weeks. They're off their bye, and they just played a group of 5 team, and they got back on track. I think this kind of sort of matches up. If Ole Miss is the road favorite, is the wrong team favored in this game? That's where I wonder.
This one's very interesting to me. And I think this one has to be played from both teams with a certain level of desperation. I don't see the loser of this game finding their way back into the playoffs. I really don't. I just think it's so difficult with the remaining schedules each of these teams are going to have. And so you obviously can't tell your kids win or this is probably it sort of discussion. You have to take this game as just this game. But just as a viewer, I'm going into this game fully expecting the loser of this is probably out of that discussion. And so there is a very added sensitivity, heightened aspect to this. That being said, I think that Ole Miss's offense is going to be able to find some scores. I think the LSU defense is going to be able to find some stops. The question to me is on the other side of the ball. Ole Miss's defense against LSU's offense. And we've said this about LSU earlier in the season, but that was a little bit before they had a freshman phenom kind of develop into a lead running back. And I'm interested to see if LSU can run the ball against that front of Ole Miss. If they can establish that and maybe try and hit on big plays over the top and play action with Nussmeier, what sort of production they can get offensively. I think Caden Durham has been really just to use the term, a complete revelation for this team. He was rarely used for a couple of weeks. And then you hand the ball to him 2 or 3 times. He's got 70-something yards and 2 touchdowns. You're like, oh, my goodness. They've been leaning on him ever since, and he has been producing. And that's out of the backfield as well in the pass game. And so I think it is going to start with him right there for LSU's offense. But that's the side of the ball that I'm interested in, the LSU offense versus the Ole Miss defense, because I think on the other way, I think Ole Miss will find some scores. I think LSU will find some stops, and it'll kind of settle in to a little bit here, a little bit there. But yeah. I'm very interested to see offensively what LSU can do, because I think if they can get the offense cranked up, they got a very good shot to win this game. It's at home. And I think that helps. The other thing that people might be a little misleading, I think Ole Miss is number 1 in the or close to number 1 in the country in rushing touchdowns. And I think that might surprise a lot of people. I know some of that's obviously from Jackson Dart, but they have a solid ground game of their own. So interested to see it get cranked up against the LSU front.
Yeah, look, Garrett Nussmeier's he's got to come out swinging in this game. He's got to come out and kind of go tit for tat with Jackson Dart in this Ole Miss offense. And that's kind of why I kind of start leaning into this LSU situation, because they got a couple things that work in their favor. The biggest thing is home field advantage, and the fact that Ole Miss has been a little bit shaky here since that loss to Kentucky. And yes, you had the big performance last week against South Carolina. I need to see it against a more competent LSU team. No offense to South Carolina. You had a Lenore Sellers who's coming off of an injury, and You had a great pass rush, but outside of that, I don't really know all that much about South Carolina right now. They're a fine football team. They're going to be a solid football team as the season goes on. I think LSU presents a different type of test for Ole Miss, but it comes down to Garrett Nussmeier being able to drop back and just shred this Ole Miss defense, because this Ole Miss offense is probably going to come out and shred this LSU defense. That passing attack with Jackson Dart is fantastic. And the Tigers give up a ton of chunk plays. It's something that they brought in the new defensive coordinator to try and kind of mitigate some of that. It's worked okay, but then I look and see that I see Trey Harris is gone. Trey Harris is about as good. He's been one of the most dominant wide receivers in college football this season. He has. I mean, just look at the numbers. It's unbelievable what he's been able to do this year. And there's nobody who's nearly as dominant on this roster necessarily. They've got a guy in Jackson Dart who's going to, throw some people open, as they say, and they'll be okay. And I think Lane Kiffin's going to draw up some stuff to get things figured out. But I just have a hard time believing that LSU is going to be able to stop them enough. That Garrett Nussmeier needs to come out here and really put on a really good show. But the thing that does work in LSU's favor and against Ole Miss on defense, or I should say LSU on defense and Ole Miss on offense, is the fact that LSU's fourth in pressure, defensive pressure. And something I listened to Cole Kubler talk as much
Do
as
you
I
happen to
possibly
have
can.
teams above them? Just wondering.
I don't have the teams above them. No,
I
can
almost guarantee you Ole Miss is above them. One of those three.
In defensive pressure?
Yeah. I mean, they lead the nation in tackles for loss. I would imagine it goes.
I would have to imagine they'd be pretty high.
Yeah.
But the point is Ole Miss really likes to drop back and pass. That's just what they do. And when they do that, it opens up a couple of opportunities there for the LSU pass rush. But you're right. No, Garrett Nussmeier, I mean, that's something that Ole Miss is they've got a really dominant pass rush themselves. They've got a great front seven.
Yeah.
That defensive line in particular is really strong for Ole Miss this season, and courtesy of the transfer portal. And Princely is going to be coming back from the injury. He wasn't playing for them last week against South Carolina, the Florida transfer. That's going to help very, very much. But ultimately, Abe, it comes down to this thought, at least. This is another litmus test. And this is why I call this moving day. And I know you freaking hate that, but it's moving day, because when you are in the SEC, the winner of this game really puts themselves into the driver's seat of not going and playing for an SEC championship, but having an opportunity to represent the conference in the college football playoff. It's going to come down to performances in games just like this. Ole Miss needs to prove it. They need to prove it. And then LSU's just trying to stay relevant, and those are really where you are in this one, because the loser, like you said, I completely agree, loser's out.
Yeah, just my final statement. I just have a tough time believing LSU can win this game just on Garrett Nussmeier. If Caden Durham is not impactful in this game, they are not going to win.
No, that's absolutely right. Very rarely is it just one thing that happens. Yeah. It's just, I tend to think then that he is going to be their biggest advantage in this one. And I think that's really important for them. Let's keep it in the SEC here. The Florida Gators are on the road at number 8 Tennessee. This is a game that, you go back to the 90s, this was about as good as it got. This was the game that decided the SEC East for a very long time. Back when you were growing up, this was Peyton Manning, and it was the fun and gun and everything else, and all that stuff was great. Well, Florida dominated for a very long time and seemed to always have Tennessee's number, and this was a Urban Meyer on up. I mean, it always seemed like Florida found ways to win this game, but for whatever reason, Tennessee has flipped the script, and we all know what that reason is. I will say this, though, about Florida. I don't want to bury Florida. I'm not trying to do that. This team's looked good after they had the bye week. They've quietly won 2 straight games. Graham Mertz has played really well. Eugene Wilson might be back at wide receiver. I mean, you have the big wins. One of them was Mississippi State. The other one was UCF. And I get that fact, but UCF is still a competent team coming out of the Big 12 conference. Mississippi State, not so much. But they needed games like that. They needed games to come out and kind of build up some confidence. They've been lacking in that regard, it seemed. And Graham Mertz seems to play a little bit better, I guess, over the last couple of weeks. But on the other hand, Tennessee, they went completely, totally silent. Bad, brutal, terrible game against Arkansas. The offense was pretty abysmal. And the defense did, they looked pretty good. And the metrics over the course of the season still look pretty damn good. But Taylon Green he did get beat, or he did beat them up a little bit. He was on his way to about 300 yards passing before he got hurt in this game. I want to see how Tennessee responds. Because everything is still very much in front of the Vols. If they just win out this slate, easier said than done, of course, because you got Alabama coming up next week. You got Georgia later on in the schedule. But if you win out, you're still going to be a top team in the country. You're still probably going to play you play in the SEC championship game. I wonder how Tennessee responds on offense, because this Florida team just feels very gettable. And then the last thing I'll say about this before I turn it over to you, because I know you have a ton of thoughts here. The Florida rush defense has been about as bad as anything else on this team. They're 100 something. They're in the hundreds in college football and all of FBS. That's the bread and butter of this Tennessee team. That's what this game is going to come down to. Dylan Sampson is going to run buck wild in this game, and I think that is going to be the big thing for Tennessee.
Yeah, look, when you and I traded texts before the podcast with some ideas, I said very quick hit. I don't know what the hell you just spent 3 minutes talking about this game for. Look, you said you didn't want to bury Florida. Tennessee's going to do that Saturday night. You don't have to. I'm less interested in the matchups of this game. Like, Tennessee's going to win this game. As a Florida fan, like, that's fine. Whatever. It's more about this game, like, just. This game used to mean so much. Like Florida, Tennessee, before Nick Saban was at Alabama, before Kirby got Georgia and Mark Richt got Georgia up and rolling. Like, this was the game that decided the SEC, certainly at least decided the SEC East. And I know it doesn't mean as much this year, certainly not, because Florida's not, doing their part and being in the relevant discussion. Still feels big. That's all I wanted to say. To me, and I know I'm a Florida fan, and so the rivalry runs deep and been a lot of important games between these two teams, understandably so. This game still feels big. It's going to be a blowout. It's going to be tough to watch. Still feels big to me, and so I still think it's a cool matchup to have.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's a great matchup. It's a historic matchup. It's one with a lot of history. Between these two teams who don't really like each other very much. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun here on Saturday. One other game that I'm going to talk about, very important here in the race for the Big 12 championship, number 14, BYU, their home field against Arizona. This kind of features two pretty good defenses here in this one. What say you, Abe?
Yeah, I'm interested to see this one because BYU, I know they're a top 15 team ranking wise. I think they deserve more recognition than they've been getting, and they're going to have to win this game on national TV to get that, because a lot of people do view this Arizona team as dangerous, and rightfully so. We saw what they've done and kind of the way they've trended after disappointment earlier in the season. But this BYU team, man, can really get after it from every aspect, man. Like, I'm not saying they can go up and down the field with Ohio State. I'm not suggesting that they're impermeable. They don't have like a glaring weakness. Like, they run the ball pretty well. The quarterback's decently protective of the ball, efficient. They can hit some plays in the pass game. I think the defense can ramp it up. Like, they do a lot of things very good. And so it's very interesting to see that they're just kind of creeping up. And we talked about the Big 12 for a while, Garrett. We were like, there's 6 or 7 teams that could win this thing. Arizona was one of them. You know who wasn't one of them? BYU. And that's the team that right now is right up front trying to make a name for themselves. And this would be a big one for them, obviously, to win. But they have kind of quietly crept into the top 15 and have done so very impressively. So I'm interested to see if they can back up that big win they had against Kansas State 2 weeks ago with another home win against Arizona. And
Arizona's already had a big win against Utah so far this season, and they're no stranger to big performances in big places. So Noah Fafita is the guy who's got to come out. Ted McMillan, of course, we know that relationship. We've talked about them ad nauseum. But BYU, they've got some guys who really like to get after the quarterback, Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker. These are two guys who both have 5+ tackles for loss. I think it's interesting. It's going to be one of those late games that you got to make sure you stay up late for, because Arizona has made a habit of playing spoiler the last, 12 games or so of their season, going back into last season, I should say. So this is a team that I think is going to be sneaky good and really could play their way up into a top 25 ranking. They've had a couple of struggles, of course, over the course of this season, but that's natural over the course of a 12-game season. Another team that is looking to stay unblemished, Pittsburgh, team that I don't think anybody expected to be this good this early a team that got out to a really hot start. They were the cardiac kids for a little while. They had to come from behind several times, but this is their best start since 1991. Do you think it's going to keep going? Cal, another brutal road trip east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, the thing for Cal is just how do you recover emotionally from a heartbreaker of a loss a week ago? And that's the thing for me, because I thought there were opportunities to have that one. The other thing is Cal. We talked about it against Miami. That secondary leads the nation the team, not just the secondary. They lead the nation in interceptions, and Eli Holstein, the Pitt quarterback. I mean, they throw the ball. They are 8th in the country in passing yards. So it's going to come down to, can Pitt throw the ball effectively without putting it up for grabs, without putting it in danger? I think that's the matchup right there. I think if he can be smart and efficient with the ball, they can, in fact, move to what would that be? 5-0 or 6-0 in this one?
Yeah, they're 1-0 in conference play. Yeah, but it's let's look back to Desmond Reed. Desmond Reed, very quietly, has been one of the best all-purpose players in the country, a player that not enough people are talking about yet. And look, he's been pretty damn good. He's been pretty damn good. If they can keep him rolling, they should have a good opportunity to win this game. But then there's Iowa State in
I will say just real quick, you talked about it earlier. You had that stat about teams traveling multiple time zones. When Cal did come east, it was to play Florida State, and they did not look good at all. They lost that game 14-9. It goes both ways. Do they look better? Maybe what did they learn from that experience? Because if they're not better than they were in that game, Pitt is going to handle this one easily.
Yeah, it's one of those games that has a lot of potential to get kind of ugly, you know?
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm just very curious about this game. But look, Pat Narduzzi and company, I mean, like, this is a crew that they came back from a huge letdown of a season last year, 3-9, missed a bowl game. Looked like Pat Narduzzi was going to be on the hot seat, maybe getting fired after that season. He doesn't. Now they're off to one of their best starts in 30 years. But let's go over to another game in the Big 12. Well, not another game, a game in the Big 12. It's West Virginia, and it is Iowa State. The Cyclones are undefeated, not quite as quietly, number 11 in the country right now. They're rolling, playing a West Virginia squad that's also coming off of a huge win.
Well, West Virginia to me is really tough to get a read on because I know they're 3-2, but they are 2-0 in the conference in the Big 12. Their 2 losses were to Penn State and to Pitt, and so it's very difficult to get a read onto. Like, maybe they can compete with teams in that group of top 15, top 20, whatever you want it to be. You know, that loss to Pitt was right there. It was a 4-point game. And so, you know, can they compete with teams in that realm, in that ranking area? I think the answer is possibly. And this is a game that should scare Iowa State quite a bit. I mean, they are best defense in the Big 12 right now. And West Virginia is going to throw Garrett Green out there and see if they can ramp up the offense. I think it's a great dichotomy of offense versus defense in this one. And it'll be interesting to see where it falls in terms of high scoring, low scoring game and who benefits from that.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those types of situations where nobody expected Iowa State to be in this situation. I had them as a dark horse. They were more a dark horse because everything else would just be cannibalized.
The dark horse would be, you had a dark horse at like 10-2, 9-3, not a team running 6-0. I feel you on that.
6-0. And look, Iowa State, they're off to their best start since 1980. A win would make them 6-0 for the first time since 1938. They've won an incredible 7 games in a row on the road. But West Virginia, I mean, you mentioned it. They're off to they got off to a brutal start, 1-2. But since then, they're looking to win their 3rd game in a row. It's a conference game, you know, and ultimately it doesn't matter really what you do out of the conference. West Virginia's 2-0. You mentioned it, in conference. And Garrett Green, this is Garrett Green versus this Iowa State defense is going to make for a very interesting game at the very least. Jaheim White's also another guy to watch. Ran for a season high 158 yards in that win against Oklahoma State, where they just blasted them on the ground, 389 yards for them. I I'm interested. Because look, he had 94 yards combined against Penn State, Pitt, and Kansas. So if he's able to really establish himself early in this game alongside of a dynamic quarterback in Garrett Green, West Virginia might be able to come in here and play some spoiler. But Iowa State, they rest on that great defensive front that they have, and I think that's going to be a really fun matchup here in this one. But last one we will mention here on the College Football Overtime podcast, Kansas State and Colorado, a team who I was effectively done with, the Colorado Buffaloes, but they're undefeated in conference play. 2-0. 2-0 is 2-0. And ironically, Kansas State, the team that I'm very much on board with Avery Johnson and company, they're 1-1. So look, Colorado has an opportunity to continue rolling. If they continue to roll, they'll give themselves an opportunity to not just win the Big 12, but have a shot to go play in the college football playoff. They're a team that's gotten better as the season's gone on. I was ready to bury this team after their loss to Nebraska. I thought it was just pretty much the same team that we saw last year. All flash, no substance. And what they have shown since then, they're a lot more than that.
Yeah, this is a game to me that tells two huge stories, but very different ones, right? Like the one story is Colorado at home against a ranked team, and we're not like burying them immediately. We're talking about could they actually win this game? I think that's hugely important, and I'm interested to see if they can win this game. The other story that can be told here is Travis Hunter and his discussion, his march towards a potential Heisman. I mean, we've seen the impactful plays he's had on both sides of the ball. If he can do that against a top 20 team, even more so. And so I think there's two varying stories for Colorado, both to me, again, just equally intriguing. I didn't think we have discussions about like Colorado and where they fit in the Big 12 anytime soon. Certainly not under Dion. They win this game. I'll be the first to admit I was wrong, but they have to win this game. And then, like I said, just the Travis Hunter factor, man. Like, what's the next wild thing he's going to do? And this time it's going to be against a ranked team. So I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, you want to prove you belong? Do it in this game. That's really what the biggest thing is here for Colorado. I'm excited, but let's jump into our shout-outs for the week. I just want to shout out one big one. It is the return of Cam Rising to the Utah Utes. He is one of the best players in America. He's one of the most consistent players in America when he's on the field. It's just that he's never on the damn field. Finally coming back. He's had the injury, the broken bone in his hand. He's finally going to get back, and hopefully he can stay there and actually see what Utah is able to do. Abe?
Yeah, look, I just talked about Travis Hunter. I believe he should win the Heisman, but if it's not going to be him, I would love it to be Ashton Jeanty. And Jeanty is going on the road with his Boise State Broncos, #1 offense in the entire country, 50 points per game right now. And they're going to Hawaii, who has the top-ranked defense in the Mountain West Conference. I think that's going to be put to the test on this one. I think Jeanty, I mean, the numbers – like they don't even really tell the story because in at least 2 of his games, he hasn't even played in the second half. He barely touched the ball in the middle or late parts of the second quarter a week ago, and he still had 100-something yards and 3 touchdowns, 164, 194, whatever the number was, 3 touchdowns. And here's the thing, though. His name has entered so much into the Heisman discussion. I think it would be coaching malpractice. And look, maybe they feel differently. I don't think you can sit him anymore. Like, I think you need to keep feeding him yards, keep feeding him touchdowns. I think you need to give him the opportunity to be like, holy crap, he ran for 319 yards. Like, I just think it's fair to him, like, in terms of legacy, to give him that opportunity. I don't know how much he would have gone for a week ago, but he's squarely in the Heisman discussion. He's not going to win it if you're sitting him for the second half. And maybe that's short-sighted. Maybe that takes away from what will eventually be an NFL career, or maybe you put him at risk for overuse or injury or something. But you got a Heisman at stake. And I don't know what can cement a legacy for the lifetime of a player more than that. And so I start to wonder if they're like, yeah, we kind of can't sit him anymore. So just interested to check that out.
I think that makes for a very interesting matchup indeed. And talk about time zones. Anybody who has to go out to go play the Rainbow Warriors over there in Hawaii, that's a tough task. Always a big ask for every team that ends up having to do it. But that's it for us right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. Ashton Ginty, maybe he goes and wins a Heisman Trophy. We'll see. It gives you a reason to go watch a team in Hawaii play football. But should be a lot of fun. Lots of fantastic matchups coming up this weekend. All the more reason to follow the podcast. Like everything that we do, man. I like it. I hope you do too. But look, follow us, subscribe. We do this every single week. We have a lot of fun doing it, and I hope you had a lot of fun listening. We will have all of our reactions coming up here on over the weekend. We will give our reaction show. I'm sure there's going to be a ton to discuss. For Abe Gorda, my name is Garrett Chapman. This is College Football Overtime. We will see you again very soon. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.